At 11:42 on a Tuesday morning, the janitor stood inside OR3 with scrubbed hands, a mask over his face, and a trauma surgeon's stillness in his shoulders. No one asked why his hands were that steady. No one asked why he looked at the monitors the way other men looked at a prayer. No one asked why the ICU charge nurse had brought him there instead of security. A 17-year-old boy was bleeding where no one in the room wanted to say the word aloud. The heart was not gone yet, but it was moving toward gone. Only 43 minutes earlier, the same man had been dismissed in a hallway for making the hospital look cheap. A board member had pointed at his Navy custodial uniform and decided she understood everything worth knowing about him. What she did not see was the lunchbox waiting on a bench outside the room, still decorated with the crooked fairy and star stickers his 6-year-old daughter had pressed onto it 2 years earlier, after her mother died. And what she could not have known, not then, not at 9:47, not when she told him to leave, was that the man she had judged by a mop handle had already spent 7 years in Kandahar, deciding who lived long enough to be carried home. The night shift ended for Marcus Holden just after the part of morning when hospitals became louder without becoming warmer. At St. Agnes Medical Center in Atlanta, Georgia, daylight did not soften anything. It only revealed the fingerprints on glass, the streaks on tile, the coffee rings on counters, and the hierarchy that had been there all night. Marcus moved through it with a measured pace people often mistook for fatigue. Residents in short white coats passed him carrying tablets and half-finished opinions. Administrators walked faster when they saw glass walls because glass liked motion. Environmental services staff nodded to him in the language of people who understood invisible work. Marcus nodded back and kept one hand on the cart. He had dark hair that had begun to grey at the temples, too early for 35. His uniform shirt hung wrong on him, as if the hospital laundry department had dressed him out of a lost and found bin. But his hands never looked careless. They were weathered hands, broad across the knuckles, with faint pale lines where old scars crossed the skin. He wore no wedding ring now. He had worn one until 2022, then stopped the day after Elena's funeral because Lily had climbed into his lap and asked why he kept turning it around with his thumb as if it might answer him. He cleaned in quiet, straight lines. He did not bang mop handles against door frames. He did not mutter. He did not stop to watch the drama that hospital staff often mistook for importance. The stillness around him made some people assume slowness. In truth, it was control. Near the ICU desk, Priya Rao looked up from a chart and watched him pass. She was 34, sharp-eyed, and never casual with emergencies, even when they arrived disguised as routine. Her ICU charge badge swung against her scrub top as she stepped sideways to let 2 transport aides through. Then, her gaze went back to Marcus for a second longer than necessary. 6 months earlier, in the employee parking lot, she had seen a man collapse between a yellow-striped curb and a silver sedan. 3 people had frozen. Marcus had not. He had dropped a trash liner, gone to the pavement, checked the airway, started compressions, and called out instructions with the authority of someone who had no time to explain why he sounded that certain. By the time the code team arrived, the man's pulse had returned. Marcus had stood up, said he needed to finish his route, and asked Priya not to report him. She never had. Marcus turned into a service corridor, signed off his cart, and clocked out at 6:13 a.m. The city outside was pale and damp. Atlanta held the last of night in the cracks between buildings, the way tired people held silence after bad news. He drove 10 minutes east in an aging Honda with a heater that only worked if the fan was set exactly between 2 numbers. He parked in front of a brick apartment building with narrow balconies and came up the stairs with the careful tread of a man who still knew how to enter a room without waking fear. Libby Holden was awake at the kitchen table in yellow pajamas patterned with tiny clouds, drawing a lopsided horse in green crayon and giving it wings because 6-year-olds were under no obligation to respect anatomy. Her brown teddy bear sat upright beside a cereal bowl as if invited to breakfast. When Marcus came in, she looked up with the unguarded relief children kept for only a few people in life. "Daddy!" He leaned down and kissed the top of her head before he even took off his shoes. The apartment smelled faintly of dish soap, crayons, and the coffee he set every night on a timer, because mornings went smoother when at least one thing in the room had prepared itself. "You beat the sun again," he said. "I beat the horse too," Lily said, holding up the drawing. He took it solemnly, like a museum curator receiving a loan from a private collection. "This horse appears to have excellent wings." "Oh, it's not a horse anymore," Lily said. "Now it's brave." Marcus smiled, but only with one side of his mouth. The full version had become rare after Elena died. What remained was gentler and somehow more exact. The lunchbox he placed on the counter was old enough at the hinges to squeak when opened. Brown canvas, metal zipper pull, fairy and star stickers pressed along one side in the impulsive pattern of a 4-year-old's hands. Lily had decorated it while Elena was in treatment, sitting on the floor with her tongue caught between her teeth, determined that her father should not go to work carrying something plain. Elena had watched from the couch, thinner by then, a blanket over her knees, though it had been June. She had not wanted Lily to learn the vocabulary of cancer. She preferred the vocabulary of ordinary things. Lunchbox, stickers, pancakes, good shoes for school, sunscreen, library book due Tuesday. Marcus no longer let his mind sit long inside that season. He let it touch and pass through. The pain behaved better that way. Still, some lines never stopped living in a room. Elena's last words to him had outlived the hospital bed, the morphine haze, the late summer heat pressing at the window glass. "Our daughter needs you more than any patient does." He heard them now not as accusation, never that, but as an order given in love. He had obeyed it every day since. He scrambled eggs for Lily, sliced strawberries, and signed a school permission slip while she narrated a dispute between the winged horse and a badly drawn dragon. There were 2 chairs at the kitchen table and a third that never matched the set because Elena had once found it at a yard sale, sanded it, painted it cream, and declared it charming. The curtain above the sink was one she had sewn herself. Pale blue with tiny stitched white flowers, almost too small to notice, unless the morning sun hit them. "Are you tired?" Lily asked. "A little." "Did the hospital need a lot of cleaning?" "It always thinks it does." She considered that. "That sounds rude." "It is a little rude," he said. She nodded as if this confirmed her larger understanding of institutions. By 7:08 he had packed her lunch, checked her backpack, and knelt to tie her shoe with the same competence he once used to knot surgical masks behind his head. The body remembered what it had practiced. The heart remembered too much. The walk from the car to the school entrance was 3 minutes, and always felt shorter in one direction than the other. Lily held his hand until they reached the painted curb. Then she let go because children understood public dignity earlier than adults thought. At the gate she turned back. "Can we do pancakes Saturday?" "Yes." "Chocolate chip?" "Yes." 2 drops of vanilla?" "Exactly 2. This mattered because Elena had once said too much vanilla was a person showing off. Lily had repeated it ever since as if it were scripture. Inside the school foyer, a teacher in a sunflower lanyard greeted Lily by name. Marcus watched until his daughter disappeared into the current of smaller bodies and louder voices. Then he stood another second in the doorway with his hands empty, as if he needed to verify she had carried all the important parts of him inside with her. He returned to the hospital by 8:21, not because he was on shift again, but because Tuesday schedules overlapped strangely, and the extra custodial hours helped cover rent, Lily's asthma medication, groceries, and the kind of small emergencies that loved widowers with children. At St. Agnes, morning had acquired polish. The gift shop lights were fully on. Families stood at reception, wearing the strained expressions of people who were trying to believe words like stable and observation. Interns clustered around coffee. A volunteer in a pink blazer adjusted brochures until the display looked cared for. Marcus picked up a fresh cart and started down the hall outside the staff break room. The lunchbox slipped because the zipper pull had caught against the edge of the cart handle. It hit the floor with a dull canvas thud and spilled open. An apple rolled under a chair, A folded napkin came loose, and then the laminated photo slid halfway out into the fluorescent spill of the room. Young Marcus, sharper in the face, darker at the hairline, standing in fatigues beneath a torn canvas shade, a stethoscope around his neck, dusty desert light behind him. Kandahar, 2009, written in black marker across the white border. One of the surgical residents nearest the coffee maker glanced down at it while fishing for sugar packets. He saw a soldier. He saw a medic, maybe. He saw the kind of image hospitals used on Veterans Day flyers and forgot by Thursday. Then his phone buzzed. His attention went where his training had taught it to go, upward, onward, visible. Marcus crouched, lifted the photo, wiped a smear of moisture from the laminate with his thumb, and slid it back into the lunchbox without expression. "Need a hand?" the resident asked out of politeness rather than concern. Marcus shook his head once. "I've got it." The resident nodded and left with his coffee. That was all. No revelation, no pause in the machinery of the hospital. Yet something had surfaced for exactly 2 seconds and disappeared again, the way metal glinted underwater before sinking back into depth. Priya saw the end of it from the nurse's station and said nothing, but her shoulders tightened. She had grown good at recognizing when the world missed evidence it had no business missing. Marcus zipped the lunchbox, set it back on the lower shelf of his cart, and continued toward the cardiac wing. He passed a wall of donor plaques polished so bright that names looked expensive. He passed a framed mission statement that used the words excellence, compassion, and innovation in gold lettering. He passed 3 board members' spouses touring a renovation mock-up, all perfume and soft shoes and concern about fabric textures in patient family lounges. He did not slow. Invisible men learned early that looking too long at wealth made wealthy people think something had been requested of them. On the 4th floor, glass walls enclosed the executive conference room like an aquarium for people who believed themselves too important for doors. Inside, folders were already laid out in strict angles. Bottled water labels all faced forward. A digital screen displayed a title slide about presentation standards and donor confidence. Evelyn Castellanos liked meetings that made other people sit straighter. At 32, she had perfected the visual grammar of authority long before she acquired any clinical vocabulary to support it. Platinum blonde hair in a tight chignon, white blazer dress tailored to look effortless and expensive, pearl earrings small enough to imply restraint, costly enough to contradict it, a designer clipboard in one hand because she had discovered that objects became symbols if one held them as if they mattered. She had an MBA, not an MD, and a board seat because she had married Richard Castellanos, who chaired St. Agnes with the confidence of a man accustomed to buildings carrying his decisions for him. Evelyn considered this arrangement neither fortunate nor political. In her mind, she was there because she understood perception, and perception was what protected money, and money was what protected institutions. Patients, surgeons, nurses, machines. All of those, to Evelyn, were real enough, but presentation was the frame that decided whether any of it counted. She reviewed the morning memo once more. Hospital presentation standards. External donor walk-through readiness. Corridor appearance compliance. She had written 3 extra lines at dawn about visual discipline among non-clinical staff because she had seen, twice in the last week, a custodian with a uniform too large for him crossing in front of the cardiac wing windows. It irritated her beyond reason. Not because he had done anything wrong, exactly, because he looked like a smudge on the version of excellence she intended to sell. Richard entered the room speaking into his phone, irritation mixed with privilege, then lowered it when he saw her face set for work. "We have to keep this to 40 minutes, he said. "Tyler's driving back from Marietta, and my sister is already texting me about lunch." Evelyn adjusted the stack of folders. Then no one should ramble. Outside the glass, hospital life moved in muted reflections. A patient transporter steered a wheelchair. A respiratory therapist crossed with a portable tank. Priya Rao passed carrying a chart and did not look into the room. Marcus entered the far end of the corridor with his supply cart at 9:46. He did not know the exact minute because people in his position did not often need the precision of meetings. But the hospital clock near the elevators turned over while he was straightening a caution sign beside the wall, and the number changed to 9:47 just as Evelyn looked up from her memo and saw him through the glass. She stopped in the middle of a sentence. Her chair slid back. Every person at the long table turned to follow her line of sight. Marcus kept walking, one hand on the cart, the lunchbox with Lily's fairy stickers resting unseen on the lower shelf. And Tuesday morning, which until then had looked exactly like every other Tuesday, moved 1 inch closer to the operating room. Evelyn crossed the corridor with the certainty of a woman who had never once mistaken her own irritation for anything less than principle. The boardroom door swung closed behind her. Conversation inside the glass softened to a blur. Out in the hall, the hospital kept moving for another 2 seconds before it sensed the shape of confrontation and slowed around it. A transporter lifted his hand from a wheelchair handle. One resident looked down at his shoes as though posture alone could make him uninvolved. Another stared openly. The third held a tablet against his chest and waited for the room to tell him what kind of witness he was about to become. Marcus stopped because his cart had reached the wall, not because Evelyn had called to him. He turned with one hand still resting on the metal handle. The lunchbox remained on the lower shelf below a stack of microfiber cloths, the fairy stickers turned inward. Evelyn's eyes moved over the oversized navy uniform, the institutional laundry wrinkles, the broad shoulders hidden under cloth too cheap for the body wearing it. In her mind, appearance was evidence. It always had been. She had built entire judgments on cleaner surfaces. "Who approved this?" she asked, not to Marcus, but to the air around him. No one answered. She took another step, close enough now for him to see the reflection of ceiling lights in her pearl earrings. "I am in the middle of a board presentation on donor confidence," she said, "and this is what our cardiac corridor looks like." Marcus waited. The silence aggravated her more than apology would have. Her designer clipboard rose in one hand like a pointer. She indicated his chest, then the cart, then the corridor itself, as though his existence had smudged all three. "Get this man out of my hospital." The words hit the tile and stayed there. None of the residents moved. The transporter looked away. Through the glass wall, 2 board members had already noticed enough to stop pretending they had not. Evelyn mistook the stillness for agreement. Marcus did not defend himself. He did not ask for clarification. He did not tell her that hospitals belonged first to the people fighting to stay alive inside them. He did not tell her he had worked in places where reputation was measured by whether helicopters returned with survivors. He simply held her gaze for 1 level second, the kind of second calm men sometimes gave storms before deciding whether to step through them. Then he said, "I'll finish this section and go." There was nothing in the sentence that sounded wounded. That, more than anything, made her hear disrespect. "No," Evelyn said. "You'll leave now." Priya Rao had stopped 2 doors down, a chart in one hand, anger moving visibly along her jaw. Marcus let go of the cart handle. He removed the caution sign hanging from its side and set it neatly atop the folded linens. Then he took the lunchbox from the lower shelf, straightened once, and nodded as if someone had just informed him the weather had changed. He began walking toward the service elevator. The residents parted without being told to. One of them, the youngest, looked at the lunchbox and then at Marcus's face and felt a brief flicker of shame without understanding the source. Marcus passed him with the practiced economy of a man who had spent years moving through rooms where panic wasted time. Behind him, Evelyn turned back toward the boardroom and said, to no one in particular, "This hospital is not a bus station." Priya heard it. So did Marcus. Neither answered. He rode the service elevator down alone. On the brushed metal wall opposite him, his reflection held the shape of someone older than 35 and less tired than grief preferred. The fluorescent light in the elevator hummed above him. He looked at the lunchbox handle in his hand. One of Lily's star stickers had started to peel at the corner. He pressed it back into place with his thumb. At the ground floor, the doors opened to the receiving corridor. A volunteer in a red vest stepped aside for him and smiled the vague, apologetic smile people offered service workers when they sensed something unpleasant had happened but could not afford to involve themselves in it. Marcus signed out in the Environmental Services office. No one had yet called down from administration, which meant the insult had moved faster than the paperwork. The supervisor on duty, a broad man named Terry, who had once driven city buses, glanced up from a clipboard. "You heading out early?" Marcus set his badge on the desk. "Looks like it." Terry frowned. "You sick?" "No." He could have said more. He did not. Terry had a mortgage, 2 sons in community college, and a talent for understanding when a question would only place another man in a worse position. Marcus took his coat from the locker, folded it over one arm, and left through the employee exit into a parking lot washed white by late morning sun. For 8 minutes, the world was only asphalt, distant traffic, and the small humiliations institutions delivered without looking themselves in the face. Then, a black SUV jumped a curb 2 miles away. Tyler Castellanos had been driving too fast on a road that rewarded confidence right up until the point it demanded skill. He was 17, seat-belted, frightened only in the instant when the wheels stopped obeying him, and unlucky in the particular way metal could fold a young body and leave almost nothing visible to explain the damage underneath. By 10:31, Atlanta Fire had him out. By 10:44, he was in the trauma bay at St. Agnes. Richard Castellanos was called before the gurney had fully cleared the ambulance doors. Evelyn learned what had happened midway through a revised budget slide and went pale in a way makeup could not correct. Aortic injury was not the kind of phrase families understood quickly. It sounded too technical to be mortal. But in the trauma bay, doctors understood at once. The blood pressure pattern was wrong. The imaging was worse. Someone said dissection. Someone else said descending, and then ascending. Another voice asked how much time they had and got no answer that counted as time. Richard arrived first, tie loose, phone in hand, his authority already beginning to fail against medicine. "Where is he?" he demanded. A trauma surgeon met him with the expression physicians used when facts outran optimism. "We're moving him to OR3. Evelyn came less than 4 minutes later, white blazer now open, one heel clicking harder than the other because she had not fastened the left strap correctly in the parking lot. She saw the red streak on Tyler's sheet and stopped cold. For one naked second, she was not a board member, not a strategist, not a curator of appearances. She was simply a woman looking at a child connected to her life and discovering that blood erased vocabulary. Richard turned on her without meaning to. "He's asking for his mother." No reply came. By 11:02, OR3 had been opened. 3 surgeons reviewed the images. All 3 were credentialed. All 3 were talented in the way large hospitals like to describe talent. Highly trained, well-published, excellent with systems that held still long enough to be mastered. None of that made the numbers kinder. One spoke first, carefully. "If the tear has tracked this far, opening him may not change the outcome." A second said, "If we lose him on the table, we need ethics sign-off that the family was counseled on survivability." The third, older than the others and more honest, put both hands on the counter and said the thing no one wanted attached to their own name later. "This may already be unsurvivable." The room did not argue. It paused in the ugly administrative way modern disaster sometimes paused. A call was placed for ethics consult, another for a second opinion. The nurses kept moving because nurses understood that motion itself was sometimes the only moral answer available. Priya Rao came down from ICU after hearing the surname, then the diagnosis, then the room number. She took in the half-spoken surrender around the edges of OR3 and felt a surge of anger so clean it clarified everything else. She had seen Marcus Holden put a dead-looking man back into rhythm on wet pavement with nothing but his hands and certainty. She had seen him read a crashing monitor in one glance. She had seen him stand afterward, as though none of it should alter the rest of his shift. And 43 minutes earlier, at 9:47, She had watched the board member, now shaking in the corridor, tell him to leave. She did not stop to ask permission from anyone whose judgment she had just measured. She went to the employee parking lot. Marcus had not driven away. He stood near the driver's side door with his phone in hand, listening to the school recording about a Friday field trip deposit and deciding whether Lily would care more about the planetarium or the bus ride. His badge sat in the cup holder. The lunchbox was on the passenger seat. "Marcus?" He turned at the sound of his name spoken at a run. Priya crossed the last yards, half out of breath. "I need you back inside." He studied her face. "What happened?" 17-year-old male, car crash, aortic dissection. They're in OR3. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened with a visible click, as though some internal instrument had just been lifted from velvet. "Who's in the room?" She named the surgeons. Marcus looked once toward the hospital entrance. "And?" "They're already talking survivability. Ethics consult." Priya swallowed. "I know what I saw in the parking lot 6 months ago. I know what you are, even if I can't prove it on paper. If I'm wrong, tell me now. If I'm right, come with me." The wind moved hot across the asphalt. Marcus said nothing for 1 second, then another. In that space there was no performance, only math and memory. Tyler Castellanos was not responsible for his aunt's vanity. Whatever anger the hallway had earned did not belong on an operating table. He opened the driver's side door, set his phone inside, closed it again, and asked the only question that mattered. "How long since impact?" "Just over an hour." "How long since scan?" "Less than 10 minutes." He nodded once. "Get me in a scrub room." They went back through the employee entrance at a pace that made orderlies flatten themselves against the wall. Priya's badge bounced against her chest. Marcus carried nothing now except the line of his own focus. He left the lunchbox in the car. Lily's stickers flashed once through the windshield and then disappeared behind the closing door. Inside the scrub room outside OR3, Priya shoved a gown into his hands. A younger nurse stared openly, then caught herself. "Who is he?" she whispered. Priya did not look away from Marcus. "The reason we still have a chance." He scrubbed without hesitation, exactly timed, no wasted movement. His shoulders settled into the gown the way some men settled into old uniforms. He tied his mask, and the room around him became smaller, cleaner, more exact. Inside OR3, hesitation had started to look like policy. Then Harold Weiss pushed the door open. Weiss was 68 now, silver-haired, with the posture of a man whose spine had been trained by decades of surgical tables and military corridors alike. His reading glasses hung on a chain against his scrub top. On his right hand, above the glove he had not yet pulled on, sat the Navy Medical Corps ring he wore even on days he claimed jewelry interfered with precision. He entered expecting chaos, perhaps surrender. Perhaps one more bad case laid at the feet of age and timing. Instead, he saw a masked figure at the table, with both hands already positioned for work. Weiss stopped. 10 seconds of silence would later feel longer to everyone inside the room. Marcus looked up first. Above the mask, his eyes held no surprise at all, only recognition delayed by 12 years and compressed into necessity. Weiss took 1 step closer. "Captain Holden," he said, "I didn't know you were in Atlanta." Every head in OR3 turned. Priya's breath caught hard enough to be heard. The younger nurse beside her went white. One of the surgeons who had used the word unsurvivable actually stepped back from the table, as though a new geometry had entered the room and he no longer trusted his position inside it. Out in the corridor, Evelyn had reached the cracked doorway in time to hear the title, and nothing before it. She stopped with one hand on the frame. Richard came up behind her, confusion and fear colliding across his face. Weiss's eyes moved over Marcus's stance, the instrument tray, the scan clipped to the light board. His voice, when it came again, stayed under the weight of 40 words because old soldiers knew excess had no place in an emergency. Marcus ran Kandahar Roll 3, 4,012 operations. He saved my son in 2010. The clipboard slid from Evelyn's hand and struck the linoleum with a hard, flat clatter. Priya looked toward the door, saw Evelyn there, and for the first time all day felt reality align itself with justice. Marcus did not turn. "Harold," he said, his voice steady behind the mask. "I need your hands, now." Weiss was already reaching for gloves. "Tell me where you want me." "Proximal control first. He tears farther, we lose him." One of the younger surgeons opened his mouth as if to reclaim the room through authority, then closed it when Marcus extended his hand without looking. Clamp. The instrument was placed into his palm instantly. What followed did not feel miraculous to the people inside OR3. Miracles belonged to witnesses. What happened in that room felt like trained violence redirected with precision against death. Marcus worked with a calm so complete it altered everyone else's pulse. Weiss moved with him in the old rhythm of men who had once learned surgery under generators, dust, and incoming rotors. Priya anticipated before she was asked. The monitor alarms rose, broke, then changed character. In the corridor, Richard stared through the narrow glass at the janitor he had never seen before. Evelyn did not bend for the clipboard. At 11:42, 43 minutes after she had told him to leave, the man she had judged by laundry and silence was the only person in her hospital no longer performing for fear. And inside OR3, Marcus Holden began bringing Tyler Castellanos back from the edge. The surgery lasted long enough for fear to lose its first sharp edge and settle into something heavier. When Marcus finally stepped out of OR3, he removed his gloves first, then his mask, then the cap that had flattened his dark hair against his head. Sweat had drawn a fine line at his temples. The old scars across his knuckles stood out brighter against skin gone pale from the scrub and the room's hard light. Harold Weiss came through the doors seconds later, tugging one glove loose with his teeth because exhaustion had made elegance irrelevant. Richard Castellanos stood before either man reached the hand sanitizer station. His voice, when it came, no longer belonged to a chairman. It belonged to an uncle who had spent the last hour learning the size of his own helplessness. "My nephew," Marcus answered without flourish. "He's alive. The next 12 hours matter, but he's alive." Richard closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped all at once, as if some private framework inside him had finally been permitted to collapse. One hand covered his mouth, the other braced hard against the wall. Behind him, Evelyn did not move. She stood where the clipboard had fallen earlier, though someone had already picked it up and placed it on a nearby chair, as if the building itself preferred tidiness to humiliation. Her white blazer dress was still immaculate, except for a crease at one hip where she had gripped the fabric too long. For the first time that day, her appearance served no purpose at all. Weiss removed his glasses from the chain around his neck and cleaned them with the corner of his scrub top, buying Richard 10 seconds of dignity before speaking. "If Marcus had not been in this building," he said, "you would be planning a different conversation." Richard looked from Weiss to Marcus, and the distance between social gratitude and actual debt became visible in his face. Evelyn swallowed once. Her gaze met Marcus's for a second, then failed to hold there. She was not a woman accustomed to discovering that the structure of her judgment had been made of cardboard. She had built her authority on surfaces so long that depth, when it finally stood in front of her, felt almost like accusation. Marcus did not accuse her. That made the moment worse. By late afternoon, the hospital had already begun its quieter form of accounting. Stories moved through medical centers faster than official memos and with better memory. By 2 o'clock, residents knew the janitor in the oversized Navy uniform had been Captain Marcus Holden, former Army trauma surgeon, Kandahar Role 3, 4012 operations. By 3, half the nursing staff knew that Harold Weiss had recognized him on site. By 4, the phrase, "Get this man out of my hospital," had started circulating with the stunned caution people used around words that had aged badly in under half a day. The board convened again in the same glass room where presentation standards had seemed important that morning. But donor confidence never made it onto the screen. Hospital council attended, so did Weiss, still in scrubs. Richard remained at the head of the table, but looked less like a chairman than a man who had learned that institutions could humiliate themselves faster than any outsider ever could. Evelyn sat with her hands folded too tightly over the designer clipboard she had recovered from the hallway. The gesture only emphasized what the object had become: evidence. No one shouted at her. St. Agnes was too polished for shouting in conference rooms. Richard spoke first. "You ordered a staff removal in an active clinical corridor during operating hours." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I acted on presentation concerns." Weiss looked at her with a fatigue older than contempt. "You acted on clothing." Silence followed that. Counsel slid a thin folder across the table. It contained incident notes, witness statements, timestamps, hallway camera stills. 9:47 a.m., the corridor, the residence, the words. Richard did not raise his voice again. He did not need to. "Effective immediately," he said. "You're stepping away from board-facing operations and donor visibility until review is complete." It was not theatrical, it was worse. It was administrative, formal, and real. Evelyn's fingers tightened once on the clipboard, then slowly released. That was all the scene allowed her. No apology, no plea, only the physical recognition that status, once cracked, could not be taped smooth again before morning. Marcus was not in the room for any of it. He was in a consultation office 1 floor below, wearing borrowed scrubs and drinking coffee gone cold 40 minutes earlier. Richard came to him there without an assistant, without counsel, without the protective architecture of title. He closed the door behind him and remained standing. "I owe you more than thanks," Richard said. Marcus said nothing. Richard set a cream-colored envelope on the desk between them. "The board has authorized reinstatement discussions, full attending compensation, backdated privileges review, and a severance package in the amount of $400,000 for what happened today, if you prefer not to return." Marcus looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. Richard went on, because rich men often believed the first offer was explanation enough. "You should also know that anything you require for Lily's schooling, housing, medical—" Marcus lifted a hand once, small and steady. Richard stopped. "I didn't come back in there for money," Marcus said. "I know." "No," Marcus said, and the word stayed soft without becoming kind. "I don't think you do." Richard absorbed that in silence. Marcus glanced through the office window toward the corridor, where nurses still moved at speed, where stretchers still arrived, where hospitals kept asking the same question of everyone inside them. "What are you useful for when it matters?" "I'll review the offer," he said, "but not today." Richard nodded. Marcus touched the envelope at last, then pushed it back across the desk. "And not the severance." He declined the $400,000 with the same calm he had used to ask for a clamp. Weiss found him 20 minutes later and leaned against the doorframe, too tired to pretend the day had not cost him something too. "Atlanta," Weiss said, "of all places." Marcus gave the smallest breath of a laugh. Weiss looked at him for a long second. "You don't have to disappear again." Marcus's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the level of the parking lot, where his old Honda sat beneath the structure lights, and inside it, on the passenger seat, waited a lunchbox with fairy and star stickers peeling at the corners. "My daughter gets a vote," he said. Weiss nodded as if that were the most military answer he had ever heard. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, the apartment kitchen held the kind of quiet that did not need defending. Marcus stood at the stove in a grey t-shirt and jeans, turning chocolate chip pancakes with a patience Lily believed was part of the recipe. The batter had exactly 2 drops of vanilla in it, because Elena had once insisted more than that was showing off. Morning light came through the pale blue kitchen curtain she had sewn herself, warming the sink, the counter, and one corner of the old lunchbox, resting near the coffee maker. Lily sat cross-legged on her chair in cloud print pajamas, drawing again. This time the paper held 3 figures: a girl, a very tall man, and something that might have been a hospital, if hospitals had windows shaped like hearts. She watched him flip the pancake and asked, "Daddy, can I come see you at work?" Marcus set the spatula down. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. He turned off the burner, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and came to sit across from her at the table. The chair, Elena had painted cream, creaked softly beneath him. "I'm not a janitor anymore, sweetheart," he said. "Starting Monday, I'm going to be a doctor again. Is that okay?" Lily frowned in concentration, the way children did when adults accidentally asked them something larger than their years. Her crayon rested against her lip. Outside, somewhere below the apartment window, a car door closed and a dog barked once. The kitchen waited with him. Then she said, "Mommy told me you were always a doctor." Marcus did not move. Lily kept going, because to her this was only remembered fact. She said the mop was just for now. The words reached him with Elena's voice hidden inside them. His throat worked once before sound returned. He looked down at the table, then back at his daughter, and for one brief second the full cost of surviving love showed plainly in his face. Lily tilted her head. "Did I say it wrong?" He shook his head. "No," he said. "You said it exactly right." He leaned forward and kissed the top of her head. One hand rested there a moment longer than necessary, as if he were thanking both the child beneath his palm and the woman who was no longer in the room, but had somehow still arranged the sentence. Lily looked toward the stove. "Can we still have pancakes on Saturdays?" Marcus followed her gaze. Batter waiting in the bowl. Chocolate chips softening in the heat. The lunchbox on the counter. The curtain Elena had sewn lifting slightly in the first clean breath of the day. He smiled then, not as victory, not as relief, but as recognition returning home to the right place. "Every Saturday," he said,